All right, welcome back to our 11 a.m. session here on Wednesday at PDMI West. I'm Tom Hare, the Chief Content Officer of the PDMI, and we're 7/8 of the way through, or we will be 7/8 of the way through our education. And we thank all of you who have come out to any of the sessions. We know that I see a lot of familiar faces, so thank you to our most committed education attendees. If you've been here before, you know that we are sponsored in the education by Pacific Media Technologies. PMT has been sponsoring our education now for the last 3 PDMI shows. They have a brief message to share with you.
Known for their superior quality and unequaled service, did you know that PMT is also an innovator in technologies that have transformed video ad services? PMT began investing in the latest cloud-based technologies and media tools several years ago with a simple goal in mind: to be recognized as the gold standard in quality and customer care. Today, PMT's services have transformed what brands and agencies have come to expect in video ad management and production services. Fast, highly responsive customer care and turnaround times with quality guaranteed. Pacific Media Technologies. Technology-driven, quality guaranteed.
So thank you again to PMT for your support. We appreciate that. Reaching the Hispanic consumer via new media outlets. We've got a great conversation here planned, talking about how the Hispanic consumer is trending on streaming fast CTV, where they can be found, so forth and so on. A fantastic set of speakers that Marcelina Miares from D2H, who's the chair of our U.S. Hispanic Council at the PDMI, has helped put together. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Good morning. Are we still in morning time? I'm on East Coast time, so for me it's the afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I'm Ozzy Martinez. I'm the head of news for the Telemundo Station Group, part of NBCU Local. Very glad to be here today.
Yeah, thank you to PDMI and all of the attendees. I'm Garrett McDonald with Audience X. I head up commercial product strategy, marketing, sales, and client services for Audience X, which is an independent trading desk based out of Los Angeles. So thank you for having me today, and looking forward to the topic today.
And I'm Marcelino Miares. As Thomas mentioned, I'm the chair of the Hispanic Council here at the PDMI, and I'm co-managing partner of D2H Partners, an agency specializing in direct response in the Hispanic market, so the niche within the niche. So thank you all for being here. We're going to take on one of the burning questions of the day, particularly for agencies in the DRTV space, but I think for media in general, which is CTV or streaming, how to plan it, how to buy it, how do you find multicultural audiences in a much less mass, much more atomized media landscape. I was just telling Garrett that we thought CTV would kind of be the panacea of applying digital models to mass television, but it's turning out to be anything but, and particularly in the DRTV space. So from an agency perspective, we're always looking forward to figuring out how to amplify our reach. You know, we're pretty much limited to long form and short form, early morning, daytime, and overnights, and we're always looking to find ways to reach bigger audiences. However, when it comes to the Hispanic market related to CTV, we're finding that there's no one way to pivot. And it's much less simple and not even easy. Sometimes people say simple but not easy. It's neither. This market is not at all monolithic, as we know from politics and from all kinds of studies. So for the moment, CTV brings more challenges than answers. So we have 2 very qualified people to help give us some perspective. We're not going to promise answers, but we're going to promise a more
and I don't know about
perspective.
Because who is right in this space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll try.
Everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
That's right.
So, according to a recent presentation by the Hispanic Marketing Council, the majority of multicultural viewers from 13 to 49 have watched a show in a language they do not speak. So, from a Hispanic perspective, they're not only watching Spanish TV, they're watching a lot more. For example, 5 of Netflix's top 10 shows are not produced in English. They're not produced only in Spanish either, but there's a lot of multicultural viewing going on. And according to the same study, 70% of shows feature a cast or a talent that is not of their respective multicultural origin. So this idea that Hispanics are looking for themselves on TV is true, but it's not necessarily the only thing they're looking for, which of course makes things more complicated. That's why I'm saying things are more challenging than they seem. We would expect that Hispanics are flocking to more Spanish language content, but Nielsen is reporting the opposite. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think if you were to take out the outliers, if Squid Game is incorporated into that study, I think that would make a lot of sense. But you also think about subtitles, the availability or the access or the capability of adding subtitles to everything really changes the game. I mean, subtitles are now so commonly used that even in the native language, whether it's background noise or the fact that most of us are watching TV through the sound through the actual TV, which doesn't have the same kind of sound processing, so the low, sound is unheard and the action is too loud, and so a lot of times subtitles can kind of normalize that content experience. And so I think there's a lot of nuances with subtitles, with cultural nuances, but for the most part, subtitles have changed the game in a lot of ways. Also, parents, co-viewing. A lot of parents holding on to their culture, and whether it's programming shared with the family, and you think about just the increase in cultural diversity, the increase in cultural literacy within the household, as you kind of alluded to there. And then you think about like content globalism. It's a really powerful way to build cultural empathy, and sharing those experiences. Not only Hispanics wanting to view content in their own native language and cultural experience, but also others trying to understand what their neighbor is associating with, or what their coworker is watching or perhaps resonating with. And so you think about just the overall globalization of people. I think those kind of are the basis for what we're seeing with multicultural viewing experiences. But
yeah, look, I think it speaks to the fact that content is king, no matter what. For Hispanics, it doesn't matter where you come from. Good content is good content, and we seek it out. I think that's one major part of that that equation. The other part is that there's a reality, right? We don't have enough Spanish language content out there. We see it ourselves. We at the NBCU local side, we launched 15 streaming channels. 4 of them are in Spanish. And some of our Spanish language, actually Telemundo Florida, which is our Spanish language news channel covering all of Florida, outpaces our English language channel. So when we provide the content, the Spanish language viewer will seek it out. I just think we have to continue to invest in this space and do a better job about getting out there. We're just looking for good content at the end of the day. Yeah.
Following up on that, that's a good point, and we've always. As an agency, we've always talked about recognizing that there's a lot of English language viewing among Hispanics, even on linear TV.
Yeah.
Right? A few years back, when Fox came into the market, Fox was the #2 network among Hispanics, or the #3 network among Hispanics 20, 25 years ago, right? So, and the issue has always been that there's not enough content. But, interesting point, this goes to a question that I was going to ask a little later. According to that same report, 74% of Hispanics say they use 1 or more streaming services in a typical day.
Yeah.
It goes on to suggest that streaming content among the major content sources has reached a critical mass of 50% compared to broadcasting cable, right? So where streaming in Hispanic has sort of hit a tipping point from linear. But this is what comes to bear, and this includes YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Disney, HBO, Paramount, and a bunch of other channels. Now, what was interesting, this is the question, there's no mention of ViX or Canela.
Yeah.
2 of the largest content providers, I don't know where they rank,
right?
But in terms of hours, 2 of the largest content providers, and no mention of them as being part of that critical tipping point. So I'm just kicking back on there's not enough content.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm a journalist, so I'd like to verify numbers, and I can't help but point out that Peacock wasn't on that list either. Of course, I have to say that as part of an NBCU person, otherwise the Peacock people will come and get me.
Peacock's not on the list.
So there's that. So there's that part of that equation. I think that the question was long term. Where is the audience? Why is the Spanish language? There's a lot of content out there, so why are they not?
Yep.
Why are they not?
Why are they not finding that content if the premise is there's not enough content out there?
Oh, but they are though, right? I mean, look again. I don't know the details, particulars of that content. I can speak to what I see on a daily basis. So we've seen it with the World Cup. The fact is, and these are public numbers, so I could talk about it. The World Cup drove something like 5 million paid subscriptions to Peacock, right? And Peacock was a new thing. And secondly, it's called Peacock. It's not even like a Spanish language. So they'll find it, right? That's one thing. The other thing I'll tell you is that from the news channels that we have that I can look at, I mentioned the fact that the Spanish language channel Telemundo Florida is, in terms of minutes spent on the channel, it's the highest of our entire group in terms of total minutes. It's the highest of all our total group. So I absolutely see more and more that they're engaging. What the issue is, we need to continue to provide this content. I'll go back to another point about going the other way. I think interesting point is it's not just Spanish to English. It's, to the point of content is king. We also find that English first speakers also watch soccer or prefer to watch soccer in Spanish. Why? Because of the way that the content is presented. So whether the particulars who ranks where, I think it speaks to the fact that there are a lot of players out there, right? The more players continue to join the space, great, but at the end of the day, it has to be what's the content that's available on all these players. And if the content doesn't resonate and it doesn't speak, you spoke a little bit about identifying. If the content doesn't resonate with the folks, it's not going to work, and they're not going to last.
You think Miami's an outlier?
In terms of engagement,
in terms of Spanish language.
In terms of Spanish language, no, because I would tell you, again, speaking to what I know on a daily basis, I also see that our California channel is up there in terms of minutes spent and length of tune-in, right? So no, I don't think it's an outlier. I think, again, Hispanics are early adopters of all of these. We will seek the content. We just haven't, a lot of us, unfortunately, haven't focused our attention on the potential that exists with this audience.
Yep, you guys use a concept of the 200 percenters.
Yes.
I think Telemundo came up with that.
Example.
And I love that.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is, I'm going to paraphrase, but essentially Hispanics live in two worlds simultaneously. So you can feel 100% Hispanic in certain routines of your day, including how you absorb any kind of content, and at the same time you can feel 100% American, depending on what you're doing at any given time of the day. So we're basically, we're living in a bilateral world, so to speak, and they very cleverly called it the 200 percenters. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that in media usage for sure, and it clouds the numbers a little bit, right? Because it's not a zero-sum game anymore like it kind of used to be. So, question for Garrett: We as an agency are starting to dive into CTV, right? We see this as kind of almost an existential issue. We need to evolve somehow the way we buy, and we are buying platforms, not channels, right? Right now we're in the shotgun mode, but we have sort of come up with a couple of buckets. One bucket is the Spanish dominant viewer, the viewer who's watching most of everything in Spanish. There's another bucket, which is the obvious one. They have their browsers turned on to Spanish, even though that's a kind of a minority of viewers. And then there's a third one, which we call Spanish interest. So these might be second generation, third generation Latinos who are coming back, maybe for World Cup, maybe for the LA Dodgers, but not these days. Or novellas because they want to watch something with their grandma, whatever. Are there any other buckets that, as we're planning media and how to reach Hispanic right now, sort of at a macro level, is there any other way to reach the audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it obviously varies from, brand, product, and service. But, it's the U.S. Hispanic consumer market represents 25% of the U.S. population. So you're talking about, roughly $2 to $3 trillion wallet, and it's one of the fastest growing GDP. So if you know, you know. If you don't, there's sort of like 3 or 4 different things that I would focus on as a marketer. Is, you know, starts with creative. You know, creative is not just about language. The language and the culture is really embedded in the Hispanic identity. And so when you're thinking about language, it's not just about like repurposing ads in Spanish.
Yes.
You know, it's like the cultural, like 70% of US Hispanic population favors brands and purchases products that, you know, where brands show an interest or an effort in incorporating those certain cultural elements, like, you know, celebrities or all the different affinities, or you know, music and movies and family and food and, you know, comedy and community. I mean, those are all kind of the pillars of, you know, connectedness to the Hispanic, you know, culture that are not just language driven, right? And so I think the power of creative, maybe something that I was building on that wasn't mentioned, you know, with all of the headwinds around privacy and identity and addressability, and, you know, the fact that there's a very low probability that there's a third stay of execution on the cookie, there's a lot of headwinds around privacy and identity and audiences. And so, you know, there's a resurgence back to the power of creative, and it starts with some of those things, whether it's you know, high impact or, you know, shoppable or conversational. These are ways to tap into the Hispanic, you know, consumer market. And, you know, the second thing I would say, just on the topic of content, you know, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of challenges with the plumbing and the piping and the infrastructure of CTV that are not very easily understood. And you know, a lot of marketers want CTV to look and feel the same as traditional TV. But the fact is, you're never going to get show an episode. That's the publisher's first-party data. It's never going to be passed through a public bid stream. You know, right now we're using, if you take a step back to like online video, we're using page-level signals. You know, the page URL is passed publicly in the bid stream. Companies come by and they crawl the page. They understand the content. They assign context, and then a brand can decide, does this align with my brand identity with respect to brand safety and suitability? And so it's very disconnected from what that video is. You know, that video that's on the page is, you know, doesn't match the page content over 50% of the time. So online video, that's an antiquated way of targeting. You have to know what's inside that video. And you think about CTV, there is no page, right? So we talked about it yesterday on the panel. Like, you could have 2 impressions that are equally valued, 2 audience, the same audience, equally valued impression on 2 different sites or apps, with a completely disconnected, no correlation between the performance, and it comes down to the content. And so understanding what's inside that video stream requires more than just the app and the channel and the genre 15% of the time in a bid request. So understanding what's in the content, being able to say, I want to, you know, align my creative next to the topic of content, match that with my great storytelling and you know, brand journalism, and be able to say, you know, that it's Aaron Sanchez, fresh seafood, overall sentiment is positive, it's brand safe and suitable, you know, Dirty Dozen approved, and you know, there's a KitchenAid mixer in the actual video stream, there's Henkel knives, you know, those are things that can be done today with the right data partners. And so creative, content, targeting, and you know, measurement. Right now, the U.S. Hispanic population, the U.S. Hispanic consumer market, is underrepresented in a lot of the data sets and in a lot of the panels for measurement. So you got to have your measurement right. You got to start with the creative. You got to get access to that video content for both online video, CTV, because the difference is, like with traditional TV, you know exactly where your ad ran. You know very little about the user, right? Just basic demographics, which is like a coin toss, maybe a little better. But with CTV, you know everything about who saw the ad. You just know very little about the content. So it's this thing where we have to make CTV look and feel more like traditional TV buying to help marketers invest with confidence, but also to drive more performant media.
I think that's getting better, wouldn't you say? I mean, you
Absolutely.
spoke all the things that are available right now. We're also looking at it, to your point about what's in that content, right? I think the future will be, and we're starting to wrestle with this too. Our particular content is news, which is a whole other space, but exactly what is the metadata attached to that news and having it dynamically changing so that advertisers can actually know exactly what sort of story, what sort of feeling, what was going on at that exact moment. I think that'll continue to evolve, and I think the other big thing that will continue to evolve in the past year and a half, I would say, I think we've been in this space maybe 2 years now, 2.5 years, and at the very beginning, very complicated working with the platforms. Everyone has their own thing. Everyone sort of gives you whatever they want, and you have very little access. Even content providers have very little access to exactly who and all of that. But we've seen, I would say, in the past 4 months, 5 months, that's starting to get a little better. So I think the model will continue to evolve to be more what we're probably all used to, those of us who've come from linear for a long time. It's just going to take a minute.
So following up, do you think that in terms of multicultural and Hispanic in particular, did I hear you say that we're a little behind, the content producers are a little bit behind in providing that kind of information to make buys that much more?
It's just a big plumbing problem. You know, you've got to get access to the publisher's content. The publisher, it's their first party data. They're not going to want to pass that in a public bid stream so that somebody could, you know, grab that whether it's nefarious or not, right? Also, a lot of marketers don't necessarily place the same level of value on publisher declared data. And so while more and more content signals, I would argue that a lot of marketers just, you know, it's kind of like a whack-a-mole. They just block news, and that's not good for journalism at all, right? And so I think that passing more content signals, not just in the content object, some of the other IAB classifications, but having a universal content identifier that isn't, I mean, think about it, like, you know, if you're you know, DraftKings, you know, and you want to target comedy, like there's 700 categories of the genre called comedy, right? So you could get The Hangover with salacious content, or if you're Huggies or Charmin trying to sell baby products to expecting parents or, you know, parents with kids, you probably want to align with, you know, The Elf or something a little bit, you know, more safe for co-viewing. So having those granular level of content signals, in the same way that we have a lot of identity signals, are going to drive more value for publishers because they're going to be able to monetize their content more effectively, and for advertisers, for marketers, you know, it's going to be more performant. All the studies indicate that when you align your creative next to the topic of content, regardless of the channel, whether it's, you know, digital or display or video or CTV, you're going to drive increased relevance, recall, response, purchase intent, you know, brand lift, like all the things that we all care about, right? So I think it's not more data going through the public bid stream, because you have to protect your first party asset. But also from one publisher to the next publisher, you have to have some sort of standardization, because, you know, like the comment yesterday, 2 impressions with the same audience on different content, there's no correlation with that performance. And so if you have the ability to understand content across publishers and audience across publishers, that is a much better, more performant world for both advertisers and publishers and consumers, which is that sort of symbiotic benefit of the whole purpose that why we're here, right?
So this is following up on what you're saying. This is a question that we didn't discuss, but
wild card. You ready? You go first.
So when we first tested CTV, going back about 18 months, and we're a DRTV agency, so we're very top of the funnel. Inbound calls is what we measure. Same creative, and this was I want to say it was in the Univision platform. We found that the CTV, same creative, the CTV, and in the same day parts, did not perform from a call perspective at all, right? I mean, way under, which sort of killed the concept for a while. Now we have other ways of measuring attribution. We have QR codes, we have pixel placement. We have other ways of doing it. But the argument at the time was, I don't scratch my head. They're watching it on the big screen. From the consumer's perspective, isn't it the same commercial? If I'm watching it on KVEA, even though it's streaming, isn't it the same as buying a spot on KVEA? So the question is the consumer, does it affect somehow the consumer behavior if it's streaming versus linear? Does the question make sense?
It does. It's up your alley. I have a content person.
I don't know that
personal perspective.
I don't know that I have a perfect answer, but I mean, I'll freestyle. How about that? But I think it comes down to the audience, perhaps. You know, you have different audience composition, and it really depends on the targeting. So without knowing those things, I don't know that when a consumer goes to a piece of content that they really care if it's traditional TV or a fast channel or CTV. They're just kind of like, I want to consume great content. I don't have to be Hispanic to view Spanish language content, just the same way that I don't really have to think about what I'm looking at. Now, I think what you're hitting on also is perhaps DRTV specific buyers that have just an immediate feedback loop on, you know, they want immediate, they only look within a window of, like a look back window of maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes, right? Whereas with CTV and streaming, you perhaps need to think about a longer look back window. And, you know, the economics are different. We did hear yesterday from TL from Roku and Caitlin from Samsung that there are performance rate cards. So, you know, let's leverage that for the right circumstance and recognize that with the optimization capabilities and with the targeting and the verification that exists within CTV, not within traditional, that you have to kind of think of it as a much longer look back window. And the optimizations that are made over that first, you know, week to 2 week can drive a lot more engagement and a lot more conversion if you wait. And we've seen that in the data. Thousands of campaigns that over the last 5-6 years that for performance-driven advertisers, whether it be, you know, a phone number or a link to a website or a QR code or interactive ads or, you know, shoppable experiences, it is a new performance channel. But you have to have a much longer view and perhaps a deeper investment.
Yeah, I would tell you, so my friend who's also works in the ad buying community, same thing. I think it has to do with changing the mindset that you need a longer tail, because absolutely, think about it. I mean, you're being delivered something that is targeted. Somewhere along the world, you search for a car, and now you're getting an ad specifically to you because you're trying to buy a car. You may not see that immediate action right away with a visit to a car dealer, but I think if you look back over a longer stretch of time, that's what my friend's same conclusion was. You need for CTV, you need a longer span. And I will also say, in terms of not having seen the ad, I'm sure it was great, but going back to creative and content, I think that, no, I agree that there really isn't a difference whether I watch this, I don't care whether it's a pre-roll or whatnot, but if the commercial doesn't speak to me, I think that's huge. I think that the Hispanic consumer sees when you, for example, try and one ad and let's just switch some stuff out, and there you go. Now it's multicultural, right? I think we see through that. I've seen a lot of effective campaigns, so I will say this is as a consumer myself now, where there's this, for example, there's this grocery chain in Florida where I now live, I think does a fantastic job. Of course, I'm served the ads both in English and Spanish, which is kind of fun for me to watch, you know, the differences between the two. But I think the most effective ads targeting me as a 200% or as a Hispanic consumer, language isn't the most important thing of culture, of course, but it's an important part. But I think more than language, it has to do with the feeling of that commercial. Does it speak to me as a Hispanic? Things like this particular grocery chain commercial, very simple. It's basically the story of a single dad and his daughter's getting ready to go to first day of school. And the English version, I think he says her name, or somebody says her name. You can't really tell what the race of you can't really tell Hispanic what, you just know they're multicultural, right? So I automatically identify, oh, they must be Hispanic. But in the English version, it's like, Stacy, time for school, and no, getting ready. In the Spanish version, it was mija. When he says mija, that resonates with me. So look, I get chills now, because those darn Publix ads there, I'll say them, they're really effective. They are really effective. But again, I think whatever agency is doing that, I thought that they did a very good job in speaking to the audience they were targeting, which is me.
Do you think that is all about authenticity, or is it?
1,000%.
Yeah.
You see past the fakeness. Or if you have somebody speak with you'd realize it's the same actor and they tried with broken Spanish, and they'll pass it off as, it's like, well, no, oh, geez, you should have just served it in English. I would have been better in English, right? Because now what happens is I'm kind of annoyed. It's like, you're trying to fool me somehow? Like, I can speak Spanish.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Do we think, one other explanation that I had at the time was that maybe the streaming audience is different from the linear audience, or the people that are shifting and adopting to streaming are somehow different than the mass audience. For example, and the reason I bring this up is the creative in question was original Hispanic, Ana Maria Polo, who was a former Telemundo. And the creative was working gangbusters everywhere else. But the product is a slightly older demographic, right? It's a 45 plus demographic. So I wonder if the streaming audience is sort of filling in from the younger demographics up. I'm thinking out loud. Is that something that?
Yes, absolutely. We do see it a bit of a younger audience, somewhat. Although to our surprise, in the news space, not really. Smaller percentages, but somehow older audiences are finding it as well. So I don't think there's a difference there per se. And again, I don't know what was considered in this case was moving the product. So we have not seen that there's a difference, though, in terms of the audience. In fact, what we've seen, especially with Spanish language, or Hispanic consumer, is that streaming is in addition to linear. We don't see it as a loss to linear. We see engagement across the board, not whether it's streaming, but it's also sort of engaging with all other sorts of digital platforms. So I don't think it's less. I'm no longer watching linear type of thing. I think I'm now also watching streaming.
Yeah, there's also a couple of considerations there. So, and as a journalist, you can fact check me, but 60% of the U.S. Hispanic population is under the age of 34. So they are, leading the way in terms of device adoption, and they over-index on video and social. And so back to the targeting components, you talk about demographics, or when you're talking about demographics, a lot of that demographic data in the industry, unless it's validated by certain companies in the industry, it's only as good as a coin toss. And so it is, in some publisher destinations and content providers, maybe skewing to a younger audience, maybe. And perhaps targeting can kind of improve some of those things to drive more, better outcomes.
Yeah, to your point, there's a couple of sources that say that there was one that said, I think in the first quarter there were 30 billion minutes of streaming, and that translated to about 3 hours a week of extra viewing time year over year to the big screen. So the question is, it feels like there's still a lot of upside in Hispanic streaming.
Oh yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Nielsen said, like, what is it, like 9 hours? I think close to 9 hours a day consumed in media. I think it's like 50% of that time is streaming.
Streaming.
Yeah, 50% of the time on the big screen is streaming. So yeah, no, I think there's absolutely continues to be an upside there.
Yeah.
And I think the demographics are going to your point, the majority of the market, the majority of the Hispanic market is now millennial and Gen Z, and whatever, I don't know what the next generation is going to be called, but whatever that is, it's going to be a higher percentage of the general market population.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and the 30 billion was in Q1 too.
Just Q1.
So
correct.
it's like, you're talking about, a lot of viewership. And so just backing up a step too, between a lot of the conversation is, linear is dying, and we heard yesterday that emphatically linear is still very, very powerful channel, and nobody should, put that aside. But I do think that there needs to be a definitional change in our space, and I've been kind of trying to understand this for the better part of a year. But you think about like traditional TV, it's kind of lumped in with linear versus CTV, and it's sort of this either or not both. And I think that there's a big misrepresentation when we talk just about linear, because within linear is fast channels. Fast channels, we're here in Southern California, the fast channel capital of the world, and that is absolutely booming, right? It is by definition linear. The only difference between traditional TV and fast channels is that one is broadcast and one is streamed. And so I think we need to have more definitional understanding in all of these studies, because linear is not separating, fast channels, and fast channels are absolutely, through the roof. And back to your point about we need more content, fast channels, really the purpose as we move from traditional to digital, and as we move from on-premises to cloud-based, the cost of production of that content has come down considerably. The cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the distribution of that content is, while it's more complex in the plumbing and the piping, the infrastructure, there are companies that do a great job of scheduling that content and working with the streams. And I guess the point is that through fast channels are the way to get more niched Spanish language content. Right now, if you look at the number of fast channels, I think is 1,400 fast channels. There's 250 of those that are Spanish. So you talk about like somewhere between 17 to 20% of the overall fast channel availability, or of all of the fast channels, are Spanish channels. And so the easiest way to create more content, the cheapest way to create more content, is through fast channels. And I think NBC and Telemundo have just absolutely been crushing it.
Thank you.
with content, whether it's news or sports or actual content. So I think you have a much more you have a greater likelihood of creating content that resonates with niche audiences, which increases the tune-in, increases the dwell time, the hours and minutes watched. So I think those numbers are only going to skyrocket.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. I think around the Spanish language part, because even I think there's been a shift, especially with the younger generations now thinking about the future in Spanish language. Those of us who are Hispanics know a time when we probably didn't want to speak Spanish because it was viewed as a bad thing. I don't think that's any longer the case. People, not only because of the numbers that are there, but in terms of culturally speaking, what you see in studies is that even certainly among the younger generation, there's a lot of interest that their kids also speak Spanish. So that hunger for that consumption in Spanish, I absolutely don't see it going away anytime soon. Continues to grow in the coming years.
Are you buying any Hispanic campaigns in the context of everything that you do, Audience X?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of advertisers that are in retail, CPG, that have products that, I mean, we also do a lot of work in EDU and, finance. And so, we're advocating, we're educating our clients that this is something that you absolutely cannot, avoid. Or not even avoid. It's like you have to be investing intelligently to authentically to the Hispanic consumer market, because it's like maybe the third fastest growing GDP. I'm talking bigger than France and France and France. I mean, in France and I'm just kidding, but France and Germany and a couple other countries combined. I mean, it's literally like one of the third fastest growing GDP. So if you know, and if you don't, you better figure it out, because that's a big wallet of consumers that have buying power.
Of those categories that you mentioned, the ones that are more funnel driven, so lead gen, like you mentioned, EDU or finance, is the CTV pricing infrastructure work for them?
I mean,
or is it still too rich?
It is, you know, I would say from a media mix, it is not the dominant channel. But there are certain products that, because of Hispanic consumer market over-indexing for video and social, and because of the fact that we do programmatic search and social, it actually is kind of by nature a very big component of their overall, you know, marketing mix. But like in terms of dollars, you know, I think broadly across all of our customers, it's not the dominant channel right now, which I wouldn't expect it to be just yet. There are certain advertisers that are just all in on CTV, and you know, because of the nature of their product, brand, or service. But for some of the clients that we have, we're really focused on omni-channel, you know, and so you don't go all in on one channel because the halo impact or effect from one channel to the next is powerful. And so our strategy is not to like over-invest in a channel. It's really to optimize by channel, by platform, to find the right media mix that's going to deliver the outcome that the advertiser is trying to achieve.
Is Telemundo working for you?
You don't have to answer.
Of course. I mean, it's a premium destination of some of the best content. I mean, I'm a sports fan. You talked about sports, so I can say this. Like, watching soccer in Spanish is like the real experience for me. I played soccer for 18 years. Like, it's the real experience for me. So I understand some Spanish. I don't speak it very well unless I'm, you know, in Mexico. But you know, it is absolutely a channel that cannot be overlooked, or a destination, I guess. There's a lot of channels and a lot of content, so for sure.
In closing, is there anything you guys want to add? Anything that we might not have covered?
I think for the buyers in the room, thank you. You were great, by the way. I don't know. We should just probably clone the speech and take it everywhere. I think frustration from people like me that are content providers and absolutely see that we deliver the numbers in Spanish, but yet we're not getting the piece of the pie that we're due. So I know that's been true for a very long time in every sort of platform that comes along. But with the targeting that CTV is able to provide, I just don't understand why people don't think that this is a no-duh idea.
Yeah.
Right? I don't understand. So I would just say, if you haven't considered Spanish language, this is I don't know what's going on where you work.
This is the time.
Yeah.
As Hispanic agencies, I don't know if there's any other in the room. We certainly share that frustration over the last 5 censuses. So it's been a long time.
That's right.
So we'll open up for questions, Tom.
Thanks so much. You were talking about censuses just now, Mars, and then earlier you were talking about the shift of 60% being under 34. What we know to be true from Generation Z is it's the first American population with a non-white majority. And we know that they're adopting more streaming and more video. And they're the first generation that grows up having a choice beyond traditional linear. And then Generation Alpha, right after them, knows nothing but streaming and devices. So I would think that that would be, right now, is kind of at the beginning of the wave of naturally moving towards this type of marketing, this type of audience to that audience. What do you guys see and project over the next 18, 24, 48 months as these trends just seemingly continue?
Yeah. I don't have a crystal ball, but what I would say is that while I agree with your statement and reference, I think households are now measured by the number of devices that are connected to the internet, as opposed to parents and children in a household. And so you have to figure out primary devices for ad serving. You have to figure, everything is kind of P2 plus, and there's just got to be better targeting solutions to reach the right consumer with the right offer that's viewing the content that resonates or is relevant. So I think there's a couple of transformations in the way that we think about the household that are perhaps more suitable for what we can expect going forward. It really is around connected devices as opposed to, I mean, humans, like we've got two mobile phones in our house. We've got probably 20 connected devices, and I'm not Mr. Big Pants. I'm saying that's probably all of us, right? So I think that's a sort of I hate to say like paradigm shift or transformation, but it really is profound when you start thinking about messaging to the right user in the right in the household.
Yeah, it makes sense. We used to think about the number of TVs in the household, so that would be the maximum number of places where you can place your advertising. But now there's this multiplier effect of devices.
Right.
So it's not about 2 or 3 TVs in the household, even though they only cost $200 now.
Right.
It's about
Amazon Prime Day today.
Right.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
Somewhat. Yeah. They rebranded. I forgot what they call it now. But yeah.
All right.
It's about the number of TVs, the number of phones, the number of desktops, the number of tablets. I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
I think the other huge thing was it Chris? Was that? I have glasses on. The lights in my.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry, but
the other big issue you brought it up sort of is the media currency issue. Is who's measuring all this stuff, and how is it actually being aggregated? And if somebody's what happens to reach and frequency? How can you project that anymore? If particularly in the case of Hispanics, we're severely underestimated in all of the media currency platforms that there are. Univision was talking about that last year. They did a huge panel, and they found that I don't know which, I think it was Nielsen, was underrepresenting them by almost 20%. Right? So really, the Hispanic audience is 80% of 100. Just in relative terms, these aren't exact numbers. Was 80% of 100 when they were being reported as 60.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a huge. I think that's going to be a huge factor.
Hi, I'm Julie Wood from Simplify. This came up earlier, especially for the click-to-call, or not click-to-call, but the cost per lead based on a phone call, and how the conversion time, the attribution window is just very different on CTV. So I'm really just wondering I know my gut is saying linear has probably been running these ads for a very long time. There's probably a little bit of brand awareness already. Then you're bringing in a new media mix. But from your guys' perspective, how do you feel like you're combating those pushbacks? You're combating those pushbacks with your clients who are just like, well, we didn't see results in 2 weeks, we're canceling. Because I feel like that comes up a lot in this space, and we all know that, right? It's usually after those optimizations are made that we really start seeing some changes. So super curious what your guys' perspective is on that.
Well, I mean, I hate to be a policy thumper, but like, was it linear or was it traditional? And so it really requires you to get to the bottom of what it was. Was there fast channels that are being lumped in as linear because they are by definition linear? Fast channels, I would argue, would be pulled out of that discussion, and you would do a side by side or an A/B against traditional and linear CTV and fast channels. So I think that's part of the issue is that what data set are we talking about here? And I think that's where you have to have open dialogue between agency, marketer, and tech provider. I think you said Simplify, tech provider, to get to the bottom of what the data is telling you, because I think there are some nuances that need to be considered there.
Yeah, our clients are super reactive. So, as we dive into this, you mentioned, a longer tail and expectations. We're sort of warning them. It may be a 4-week buy. Let's look at a 12-week window, 12-week look back to see how it really performed. And then let's make sure we're not only measuring the TFN anymore. Let's make sure we're measuring the QR code scans. We're measuring any pushes to Amazon that might have come from that. We're looking at it 3 or 4 response channels from that same creative, and aggregating all of that. It almost feels a little desperate, but it's the reality. And we've got to get our clients really to be a little more patient.
Anyone else? All right, let's hear it for this group. Wonderful.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.